Hello, DC Church. Pastor Cal here. Welcome to Connect Group. Here with Mike and with Jim as well. Say hi, guys.
Hi.
Don't be shy.
Hey, guys.
So we're so glad you joined us for this lesson. We are in session 12 in your books right here. And we are talking about, being good and being a part of the nation or the country you live in, right? We're Americans, right? And we have a government in America, a democracy. And so we should try to be good in the government that we have. And so how do you do that as a Christian? And what do you do when your beliefs conflict with the government, where you feel like, hey, the government's bad, or the person that I voted for lost, and I'm upset, I'm disappointed, and I'm going to act out on it. You guys don't ever act out on social media, do you? You don't ever say things that are a little bit crazy. Now, to preface this, when Jim leads, normally it's very organized and we're kind of like having a good flow. When I lead, it is the wild, wild west. I don't even know what's going to happen next. So just you're in for the ride, folks. So we're going to do
Buckle
this
up.
now. So the point of our lesson today is that believers should try to represent Christ well in their community and their world, right? So we are to be a good citizen, do the right things, obey the government. But how far do we go, Jim?
That's a great question.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we'll talk about that as we progress through the study. But we have, as you say, we have a responsibility to submit to the authorities. The Bible tells us that any authorities in place is only there because God allowed it to. So I don't want to give away your whole study, but there is a limit.
Please don't.
There is a limit.
And we're done.
And we'll talk about that. Yeah.
But so the idea is that God put governments in place, and we'll talk about what that actually means. And so, Mike, my first real question today for you is, how would you describe your relationship with the government? And you live in Portsmouth, right? How do you relate to your government in Portsmouth?
Well, I mean, I like to think that I relate to them pretty well. I mean, I like the police officers. I respect them a lot. I appreciate what they do for us, and I try to do a good job of upholding the law and living by the law. And I might not always agree with some of the things that the government does in Portsmouth and some of the stances that they may take, but I can respect them as people, and even if I didn't vote for them, I can respect them.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, Mike, I noticed when you were talking about you try to follow the law, you looked a little more nervous than you did when you were speaking before, and I just couldn't help but point that out.
Well, we all slip up every once in a while.
Yeah.
There was that one time at the bank where I left with more money than I should have in big bags, and I had a mask on.
Good night, man.
But it was just one time.
It was just one time?
Yeah,
Man,
just one time.
I tell you.
Well, everybody's wearing a mask to the bank now.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. If you're wearing a mask in public, you're not suspicious anymore.
Right.
You're just you're part of what's going on. Yeah. So we're in Romans chapter 13, and we're going to read, okay? And Jim's going to read for us to begin 1 through 3.
Let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God. So then, the one who resists the authority is opposing God's command, and those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have its approval. For it is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for no reason.
If I just read that and had nothing else to go off of, I would think Paul, who wrote Romans, he's telling us, have a slavish obedience, unquestioningly to authority, to government, because that's kind of the way it comes across. And we'll talk about why that is, and we'll go deeper in a moment. But the basic ideas here are that you submit to the government as you do to God. Submit to the government as you do to God, because you see, God is in control, and God has all the power, and He's given some of the power to the government. Okay, and so all governments they are here because there's a God who exists and has the power and gave them power and allows them to be here. That's all governments. That's North Korea, that's France, that's Nazi Germany, that's Communist China, that's the USSR, that's Canada, the nice nation, the good guys, And so they all have governmental power because of God. And I would go beyond that, and I would argue that even North Korea punishes criminals for stealing or for murder. And they should. They just also do a bunch of really bad, terrible things in addition to that. But they have power because God allows them to be. Okay. And so when you recognize the power and the role of the government and you resist that, you're not really resisting the government, Jim. I mean, you're resisting God.
Mm-hmm.
You're working against God and who he is. And so if you do what's right, Paul tells us, you don't have anything to worry about. If you do what's right, don't fear. So live a good life, do what's right, and you'll have a good relationship with the government. And so the government has the God-given right to punish criminality, bad behavior, even to execute people and to go beyond that to wage war. The government has a role to wield the literal. The government has the ability to wage war and to execute if they need to. And so that's kind of hard to digest because I don't have the right or the ability to execute, but the government has that right. And so there's a little more going on here we're going to talk about, which is that when Paul wrote this, a big event happened in Rome, and this letter is to the church in Rome, and that was the Emperor Claudius very recently. And there's debate about what date it happened, but not that it did happen. And that Claudius was the emperor there, and there were Jews living in Rome, and they were arguing about stuff, theology and things that was getting pretty crazy. And in particular, they were arguing about a man named Chrestus. And so who was this Chrestus? Well, it may have been a reference to the Greek word Christos, or Christ, so Jesus. And Jews were arguing about who Jesus is. Is he the Messiah? Is he one to worship, or is he not? And Claudius said, I am tired of you Jews and your arguments. And he expelled them from Rome, Mike. And so Acts chapter 18, Paul actually runs into a couple when he's evangelizing and spreading the Christian message, who the Bible tells us were expelled from Rome when Claudius expelled the Jews. And so, in essence, Paul appears to be contextually speaking about if you don't like the government, ought you just kind of be quiet and live a quiet life? Or should you go, you Romans, you believe in many gods, you do nasty things, I'm not paying your taxes, I'm not a part of this because I worship the one true God, and I don't have to listen to you. And so Paul's argument appears to be, sit down, shut up, and do the plain stuff that's right in front of you. Obey the government in the ways they don't contradict God, and do what is right. And so that's kind of the context of the passage today. So now I have a question for you. And that question is, once I get through my notes here, how might a believer show respect to leaders when they disagree with the government leaders, right? So have you ever had a politician that, frankly, you just didn't respect, you didn't like? I can feel your hands being raised, even though I cannot see you in the room right now, because I know how you feel. So, Jim, how might a believer show respect to government leaders even when they disagree with government leaders?
Yeah, Paul makes it very clear that we are to follow the authority, follow the government authority. I think it's the same way you show respect to anyone, even regardless of the situation, right? If you don't agree with the person in front of you in line, or you don't agree with the person who's trying to cut you off in traffic, right? As believers, we're called to honor those folks, to show respect to those people. And we have to take that to government leaders. That tends to be a more polarized relationship, I think, because usually it involves our money, and we're all very sensitive about our money. Right? A lot of times it involves our money. Or with government, it involves a way that we can live our lives, right? So great example right now is what we're living through with the stay-at-home orders, the coronavirus. Everyone has different opinions on whether we should be able to do, how we should be able to live our lives. But the bottom line is our government is asking us to live in a certain way, telling us to live in a certain way. And we need to do that. As much as we may not like it, as much as we may feel like it's being overblown or exaggerated, whether we believe that or not, we have a responsibility to do what our government's asking us to do. So to answer your question, we show respect by following the orders that we're given.
Okay, so Mike, let's kind of go with what Jim was talking about there, and so with this whole disease right now and all that's going on, how have you been challenged in your need to respect our leaders and the rules and laws? Have you had trouble with that at all?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, when you think about that, and this has come up a lot at work, where I work at a company that's got almost 30,000 people in it, so there's a lot of different viewpoints about what is safe and what is not safe and what a level of precautions we should take. So almost everybody you talk to has their own opinion on that subject, right? And so if I were being honest, I think to some degree we've kind of gone overboard with the level of security that we put out there in terms of protection that we're doing. But at the same time, I've honored that because that's what's been asked of us to do. And whether I agree with it personally or not, that's the sacrifice that we make when we're looking out for other people and trying to, put their best interest in mind. So
it's kind of like winning the battle versus winning the war. And so you can win the battle and make a point and go, I did it my way. I don't care about the rules. Or you can win the war and you can be a person beyond reproach where no one can look at you and go, man, what a jerk. But they go, I see Jesus in you in everything you do. And that's the point that Paul's making about live under government rule as you're describing, Mike. So very good.
Yeah, and I think we can tie this back into our lesson from last week, sacrifices, right?
Yeah.
We have to make sacrifices because for the good of, just doing our part to do what we can to kind of keep this thing in check, but also because we're being watched. And us, it would be really easy for us to say, I don't care what that guy says. I'm going to live my life the way I want to. And maybe you can, maybe you can't. But someone is watching you. And what kind of a statement does that make about our relationship with Jesus if we're saying, you know what, I know what they said, but I don't care what they said. It's not a very good one. And it's in case you didn't get it. But it would be really easy for someone to say, you call yourself a believer. Why would I want to be what you are when you don't even respect authority? Yeah. So there is an element of sacrifice in there as well.
Yes, there is. And so it's going to get worse, folks. And it's going to get worse right now. So will you read for us, Jim, continue in our scripture?
Yes, sir. So this is Romans 13, verses 4 through 7. For it is God's servant, an avenger, that brings wrath on the one who does wrong. Therefore, you must submit, not only because of wrath, but also because of your conscience. And for this reason, you pay taxes, since the authorities are God's servants, continually attending to these tasks. Pay your obligation to everyone, taxes to those who you owe taxes, tolls to those who you owe tolls, respect to those to who you owe respect, and honor to those you owe honor.
Jim talked earlier about, when people touch our money, we get upset. Well, guess what the Bible just tells us? They're going to touch our money, okay? This is getting messy. So the government has been ordained. So God's put them there to avenge wrongs, okay? So we look today in a modern mind at we look at law breaking as people go to prison and they need to be, rehabilitated, given a chance to do better and just go in the corner and think about what you've done, and then come out and be better. But Paul's view appears to be that the government's job is to punish, to rightfully punish wrongdoing, okay? And that's the point, okay? And so the believer should do what's right, number one, because you're going to get punished, right? And number two, because right action is good, and our conscience, our inner being, tells us, do the right thing. Don't steal. Don't murder. And don't do all kinds of other bad stuff. Speed, drugs, etc. Speed, if you will. So the government also collects taxes, makes you pay tolls. And this is a role that God ordains, because how can the government be the government if they don't have money to be the government? Mm-hmm. So they tax us. And it gets even worse. We live in a democracy, right, Mike?
Right. Yeah.
So we actually have a say in the way things are. And Paul lived under a Roman emperor. And they just said, tax time, shut up, hand out, money better be in it. And that's not how we live. We get to actually have a say in our world. And we're still mad and angry and resentful about everything. Yeah. So, Mike, how could you be joyful in paying taxes? How could that change how you feel about the situation?
Oh, man. Well, I think there's a lot you could dig into that with the, political side of it. Take all of the other areas that you talked about earlier, like Nazi Germany, out of the equation for a minute, and just talk about America. And so on the political side, you could make the argument that the government just can't function without some kind of taxes coming in. What's reasonable and stuff, that's tricky. But to me, I don't let that faze me, because I just look at that as that's coming out even before I get whatever my portion of it. It's kind of like tithe, right? The first thing I'm gonna do is pay my tithe, so I don't worry about a tithe because I'm giving that to God immediately. So whatever's left is what's left. You know?
Yeah, Mike, and I think when you talk about giving your tithe, and I think that helps us when we come back to the fact that it's not ours anyway.
Yeah.
Right. It all
Right.
belongs to God, and when the government's asking for their share, or what they believe to be their share, even if you don't agree,
Right.
to remind ourselves that just as when we give our tithes and offerings, we're just giving back to God. We're just giving a portion of what's God's to the government authority. And Jesus modeled this.
Yeah,
right? Give
absolutely.
to Caesar what's Caesar's. So yeah, we don't have to agree. And I think like-minded people can disagree on how much taxes are too
Sure.
much, but
Yeah.
we have a responsibility to do that. So
Yep.
sorry, Cal, we're just kind of a little
No,
conversation.
I think that, to kind of echo off Mike, when God becomes more important in the believer's life, then number one, you want to tithe.
Yeah.
But also with taxes, you realize it's going to be okay, even though I got to pay taxes, because God becomes greater and more of an influence in your life. And so the issues you get mad about and you rant and rave about become smaller in light of who God is. But you can still have passions, opinions about, taxes, flat taxes maybe, a VAT tax. Well, we'll leave, yes, anyway. Everyone's
And we
shut up,
should.
nerd. Oh, no.
And we should, right? I don't believe God wants us
Where's
to be
Ross
apathetic
Perot
about
when you
this.
That's right. Where's Ross Perot?
I don't believe God wants us to be apathetic about this. That's
yeah.
one of the
Yeah.
privileges we have of living in a country where in November, if we don't like the way things are going, we have an opportunity to kind of change that course.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And there's an underlying doctrinal truth that kind of cuts through all of this too, as believers, right? And Christ talked about where your heart is, and so for those of us who are focused on money, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how we got to pay taxes, right? And so that kind of tells, back to Jim's point earlier, that kind of tells the world what your focus is on. Your focus is on the money. And so as believers, if all we did was go around talking about, I can't believe I got to pay all these taxes, then that's what people think. That's all we think about is the money. And we lose our opportunity to talk about the gospel because we're so focused on other stuff like taxes.
that's good.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
So the goal is for God to be greater in the believer's life in every single area. So now, Jim, will you keep reading our scripture for us, 8 through 10?
Absolutely. Romans 13, verses 8 through 10. Do not owe anyone anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and any other commandment are summed up by this commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law.
DC Church, we have a 3-part model for understanding church: worship, connect, serve. Okay? Worship God, connect with others, and we serve the world. That's who we are. That's what we do. So, in essence, we love God and we love each other. That's what we do. So, you think here about the 10 Commandments. They have to do with those two things. You love God and honor Him appropriately, and you love each other, right? When you love someone, you don't steal from them.
Right.
Commit adultery. Covet.
Yeah.
You certainly don't murder them. I love you so much that I killed you.
Loved you to death.
Loved you to death. That's right. And so obeying the 10 Commandments, the very heart of the Jewish law, means loving God and loving your neighbor. So the whole Jewish law points to these two great truths, and that Paul really brings this out here. But he also brings out a greater idea that I want to emphasize, which is that this is a very freeing way to live, okay? Because we don't live under obligation or slavery to anyone. Do not owe anyone anything. This does not mean that you can't have a loan, but it means if you have a loan you can't pay back, that's bad, right? That's an uncontrolled way of living. And if you have animosity between other people, between like you and then others, what's happening with you is that you kind of like owe them. You're like broken with them. You're not on the level, right? And so What Paul is telling us here is to live in a beyond reproach, moral and good manner with the government and each other, and be known for a radical love and upholding what is right. And so in that way, you don't owe anyone anything because you're always standing for what's good and what's godly. So how does keeping the commandments listed by Paul, how does that demonstrate our love for others, Mike?
Well, I mean, I think you kind of hit it on the head when you were just describing that a minute ago, where, and to really understand this, we have to think about it in a definition of love more in line with the way God views love. So if we're honest with ourselves, the human view of love is kind of faulty, right? I mean, because we love ice cream and we love cars and we love a lot of stuff. God's talking about a very specific kind of love, right? And so when he's talking about loving others, when you get to that level of love he's talking about, just like you said earlier, it's impossible for you to go out and murder somebody that you love. And so we think about that in the context of those people who live by works, who live by trying to uphold the law, like the Jews who tried to live by the law. They never succeeded, right? Because the missing ingredient was the love. Yeah. And when you get to the point where you love people, it's natural. It's just, you don't even have to try to uphold the commandments anymore because it's just natural coming out of the love that you do. It's just a natural part of your life. It's kind of organic in that sense. Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, man, this is taking a stark turn towards like Woodstock and kind of like a hippie type thing. Well, guess what? They took those ideas from Christianity, okay? Because that's where they originally came from. And it's this idea of a radical, freeing love. Instead of complaining about the government and working against that and living for this age, you can make someone have your beliefs outwardly. But the gospel of Jesus Christ and like the love that the people of God display, that actually changes a person from the inside out and leads to a bigger change than a government could ever bring about.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel, Jim?
I feel so loved, Cal.
I feel warm inside. I feel held and comforted.
But it's that idea of freeing, right? So when you're living your life in a way that when you're following the government, right, you don't have to worry about, man, are they going to remember what I did, or did somebody see me? I think it was Mark Twain. I think said, if you never lie, you don't have to remember what you said, right? Because it's not. Was that Mark Twain? I don't know. I'll give it to Mark Twain. Anyway, the point is that if you're living your life, if you're living your life free, if you're living your life free according to God's standards, then you don't have to worry about, man, did I mess up? Did I offend this person? Did I say the wrong thing? Did I do the wrong thing? Because you know that you're living for God, and if you're living your life for Him, then all this, and you're following His commands, and everything else is just going to fall in place. And again, just freeing. That's the word that keeps coming to my mind. It's just a freeing way to live. And just not being so angry all the time. I think one of the big things that when we talk about respect, respect isn't just paying your taxes. It's also how you talk about those in authority, right? How you talk about it with each other, how you talk about them on social media. So even though we're paying our taxes, but we're blasting those in authority on social media and calling them all kinds of names, that's not respecting the authority either that God has put in place.
Barack Obama and Trump each have a title. It's called President of the United States, right. Okay? It shouldn't be Obama, Trump. That's not good, okay? Because they have an elected office that they occupy. And so we should recognize and respect our leaders. And so would you keep
We don't want to get political. But,
we don't.
But it's so my point is that we respect everyone in office, regardless of the party, regardless of whether you voted for them.
Yes, that's the point I'm trying to get to is we have a government that's elected. We should respect and honor our leaders and recognize that they're there by God's appointment.
Exactly.
Would you keep reading for us, Jim?
Yes, Romans 13, verses 11 through 14. Besides this, since you know the time, it is already the hour for you to wake up from sleep, because now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The night is nearly over, and the day is near. So let us discard the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us walk with decency, as in the daytime, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality or promiscuity, not in quarreling and jealousy. But put on the Lord Jesus Christ, and don't make plans to gratify the desires of the flesh.
Something's about to happen here. I want you to pay attention, okay? I'm taking the gloves off, all right? And it's going to get real for a second, okay?
It's real in here.
Well, I have a very dainty glove that is a little bit lighter, and it goes down to like here. So Paul is teaching here, okay? He's teaching chronologically, okay? So we have a temporal world, which is like this lesson will last this amount of time, and if it goes past that time, it's too long, or whatever. Chronological is like an event-based understanding. So it's like after this event comes this event. So you're near to the next event because the previous event already happened, all right? And so for Paul, his argument is, it is time, it's the hour for you to wake up from sleep. Because when you became a Christian, Jesus Christ had died on the cross and he had risen from the grave and he had gone to heaven. And the next step in his history is to return to the earth, okay? And so chronologically speaking, it's time. The time is near. The night is nearly over and the day is near. So wake up. When you're asleep, it's kind of like a life, right? It's like you can dream. You're still breathing, you know? Your body is still working the way it's supposed to work, but you're not really like active and awake. And so wake up. Be a person who's actually alive and aware of what is going on. Discard the darkness stuff, all the deeds of the darkness, and put on the armor of light. Walk in a decent and good way as in the day, okay? In the day, how do you walk around? I'll give you a few things. Clothed. Okay, put together, hair combed, teeth brushed, okay? Be ready to do what is right, okay? Don't live your life carousing in drunkenness and doing nasty things, promiscuous stuff. Don't be a quarreler and be jealous, but put on Jesus Christ. Live in that changed way, awake, and don't make plans like an animal to give in to your fleshly desires, okay? So let's take drunkenness as a really good case of this, okay? Alcohol technically is a drug, okay? And drug addiction. And so people will say, it's wine o'clock. It's just been a tough day. I need a glass of wine. I need a drink just to have an escape to get through. That is an attribute of living without intention and purpose, okay? The Bible clearly condemns drunkenness. That drunkenness takes you out of your mind, how you ought to live, and it's not honoring to God. And so as a way of looking at life, a Christian believer ought to be a person living with meaning, purpose, intention. That's how life should be. If you don't watch where you're stepping when you're awake, you're going to step on a rock or you're going to hit a curb. Now, if you're watching this and saying, Cal, I've seen you walk around and you are so clumsy that you might as well be asleep, and say, that isn't in our lesson today. I'll talk to you later about things. But I do have some questions for you about this. How does thinking about Christ's return, how does that cause you to look at your life today? How can you make a difference as a believer today in light of what Jesus has done for you and the fact that he'll return one day? Jim?
Yeah. So I love what you said about living with purpose and intention, right? So whether you're, a pastor like you and I, or whether you're, working for, with 30,000 other men and women building ships, your job as a believer, you're a missionary in that shipyard you work, right? So you go in there every day. Yeah, you have a job to do, but when you do it to the best of your ability, you honor those you work for, you honor God, but you also make a statement about who Mike Cook is as a follower of Jesus Christ. So regardless of what you do, right? I don't care whether you work at Chick-fil-A, you're a doctor, you work in a shipyard, your purpose is to make God known.
Yeah.
And when you live your life with that purpose and with that intentionality, man, everything else, just again, it's freeing, right? Because if you're doing your best at work every day, right, regardless of what the man says you're doing, you've done your best, and you can look at yourself in the mirror when you get home and you can lay your head on your pillow. So I think when we live our lives, getting back to your question, Cal, thinking about Jesus' return, thinking that we need to be as good an example and tell as many people about him as we possibly can through our words, yes, but also just through our actions. That's how it should motivate us to live our lives, because we know that day is closer than it was yesterday.
So, Mike, can I steal office supplies from my job?
Can you or should you?
Should you? Should I steal office supplies from my job?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. So are there inappropriate ways of being light in a dark world, Mike? Are the ways that a Christian ought not to go?
Yes. I think that's a definite yes. And, unfortunately, there are believers who would wield the gospel like a weapon. And when it comes to, if you don't believe you're a sinner, they're going to beat you into submission with the gospel until you come to accept that you.
Amen.
So I would say definitely that's inappropriate. And one of the things I love about Jesus is the fact that he gives us a great model for every scenario like that. And the one that just always stands out in my mind is the woman at the well. So Jesus certainly could have been witnessing to her in a way where he's just smacking her over the head with her sin. But that's not what he does. So he comes up to her in a very non-confrontational way, very deliberate, and he kind of orchestrates this scenario where he can kind of bring her to grips with her sin at a nice, easy pace to a point where she's ready to go tell the world about what he did for her, right?
Very good.
Yeah.
I think that's a great example of that. So
Too much light, what does it do?
it burns.
Oh, it burn or blind you, right? So you can be such a bright light
Yeah.
that you're blinding people around you because you're just, like you said, Mike, just kind of wielding the gospel as a weapon.
So do you want somebody in the morning to go, hey, it's time to get up now, and they push your arm? Or do you want somebody who grabs a pot and bangs it and pulls the covers back and turns the lights on? One of those is kind of jarring. And so that's kind of that Mike is bringing out. So as we finish today, believers should honor the government and its leaders by being model citizens. Believers should demonstrate Christ-like love to all people, especially other Christians. And believers should live holy lives waiting for the return of Christ, expecting it as if it is going to happen. So how can you be a light in your world? That's a question that Mike and Jim and I can't answer. Only you can answer. And I challenge that, and I challenge you to answer that this week. Thank you for attending Connect Group, everyone.